Hey guys, this is Eric Stackley with JBL. Today on the workshop, we're going to teach you how to upgrade the sound system in your boat in 5 easy steps. All right guys, we're going to jump right into it with step 1, and that's assessing the current system and battery setup that's in your boat. The first thing we need to determine is how many speakers you have. Do you have an amplifier? Do you plan on adding speakers? Also, what is the wiring condition that is currently in the boat? Is it 10 years old? Is it 15 years old? Is the wire oxidized? Are we going to need to replace these wires? As well as what is the condition of the batteries? When you add a big sound system to a boat, you put extra stress on the electrical system, and we need to make sure we take the proper steps to have fun on the water by having plenty of power, because a lot of times you play your system in your boat without the boat running, so there's nothing charging the batteries. But this first step is about assessing what's there so that we can determine what to do next. Jumping straight into step 2, which is a super fun step. You got to be honest with yourself. And that's, what do you want out of the system? What is the size of your boat? Do you need more speakers? Do you want to make sure you can hear the music just while you're floating and fishing? Or do you want to hear it at wide open throttle with 8 of your best friends on the boat having a good time? Part of determining the sound system is figuring out what speakers you need, the proper placement, as well as how much amplification you'll need to run the speakers that you want to run. JBL has you covered from 5-channel amps, 4-channel amps, 8-channel amplifiers, as well as a mix of monoblock amplifiers to run multiple subwoofers. But the first step is finding out what we need and what the goal is. How loud do we want to be? Do we want to hear the music from the driver's seat, but also be able to tube, ski, or wakeboard and hear the music 30 feet behind the boat? These are proper steps to take when you're designing a system to fit your boat and application. And for step 3, my favorite stage, this is the design phase. This is where we get to build the perfect system that's not only going to perform well, but it's also going to fit your needs. Let's say we're going to start real basic and we just have a simple 17-foot boat and we plan on riding around with a couple buddies, fishing a little bit. That's where we'd want to maybe look at the Stage Series JBL speakers, a super efficient marine speaker that you see here. You've got a cast basket that's cast polymer plastic. You don't have to worry about moisture, but these speakers will work great off a Aura BT, a Jam 3000, or a Jam 5000. This is a no amplifier needed build to give you great sound at a great value. Of course, if you want to pair these with a Jam 5000 or an Aura BT and an amplifier, you can do that as well. And we have a club amplifier that would match that with no problem. We also offer the Stage speakers in a 10-inch subwoofer, so you can build upon a basic system. Now, the next step up we would want to look at is going to our club speakers in a 6.5 or an 8. That would be these here. Now, these I would highly recommend using a club amplifier to match to get the best performance. As well as we have 10 and 12-inch subs that would match. Now, back to the Jam 5000. This is a critical unit to do if you want to have multi-zone audio. So the Jam 5000 gives you the ability to have a bow of the boat have one volume, the stern or the back of the boat to have a separate volume, as well as a set of tower speakers that you could have a separate volume on. Now you're wondering, what about my sub? We've got you covered on that. This unit has a separate subwoofer output for each pair of zones. So you can run front and rear, towers and a sub, and have all separate volume control over those zones. And that's kind of what I was talking about the build phase. This is where you really want to think about how to design the system that fits your application. Let's say you have a cabin cruiser boat where you have a sleeping quarter in the bottom of the boat, but you got small children. They want to go out after a busy day on the lake and relax. They want a little bit of music, but they don't want to blare. Then you put them on zone 2 or 3 and cut the volume down in the cabin, while at the back of the boat, you can blare the music. Or let's say you're floating out on a tube or you're skiing, you can cut your tower speakers up. And that's what the importance of the multi-zone is. And that's where a good head unit starts. And we've done a really good job with the Aura BT, the Jam 3000, the 5000, and the soon to come Jam 6500 to give you all the options to have as many channels as you want. If you look at a Jam 6500, you have 12 channels of output on separate zones, 4 zones and 4 subzones to have a multifaceted approach to audio, especially for a larger vessel. Not to say you can't use a Jam 6500 or a 5000 on a smaller boat. A lot of wakeboard boats that are only 21, 22 feet use 4 tower speakers, 4 to 6 speakers in the boat, as well as 2 or 3 subwoofers. So it's good to have all the options out there. That's also where, if space is a premium, your 8-channel amplifier becomes an absolute weapon. I could show you a million ways you could design a system with just an 8-channel amp. You could take channel 1 through 4 and run your 4 interior 6 or 8-inch coaxial speakers. Channel 5 and 6, you could run on a set of towers, and then you could bridge 7 and 8 on a sub. Or you could run this with 2 10-inch subwoofers and 4 8-inch speakers. If you have a lot of bass requirements, maybe you want to run a pair of 12s, then you would use our Club 1000 to run the subwoofers, and then you would run an 8-channel on your mids and highs. If you want to go a little more simplistic, you could do a Club 5-channel, which would run 50 watts to 4 6.5s or 8-inch, especially stage 8-inch, and give you good, adequate power, but then also have a 500-watt output to run a single subwoofer. So you've got a bunch of options, and that's part of the design phase. Another big key feature in the design phase is if you decide to run RGB, which comes standard on all Club 6, 8, 10, and 12-inch speakers. This gives you the ability to have accent lighting inside the boat, but you also need to account for extra wiring if you're going to have RGB. And that also goes back to the assessment phase. Did your boat have RGB speakers? Maybe you already have wiring there to support it. That's something you do in the design phase to figure out what you need for your install, which is coming up in section 4. Now, for step 4, I said 5 easy steps. This step can be easy or difficult, depends on your install. The big key here is, do you want a professional install, or are you a DIY guy that wants to do this yourself? Part of that first step, which is assessment, is determining the size speakers you have. The average boat carries a 6.5-inch speaker, which is quickly on modern boats changing over to a 7.7 or an 8-inch speaker, which we have to fit your needs. Now, not every speaker manufacturer uses the same cutout diameter. So the great thing about the JBL speakers is anytime you buy a set of club or stage speakers, inside the box is a cutout template so that you can trace and cut your holes larger if you decide to upgrade, as well as giving you the layout for the screws if you need to re-drill the fiberglass, which is an important step when screwing a speaker or amplifier into fiberglass. You always want to pre-drill those holes so that you don't crack the gel coat or the fiberglass. The other thing is, and I talked about this a little bit in the assessment phase, was talked about batteries. So if we're running multiple amplifiers, we want to make sure we have the adequate amount of batteries for our listening time. We can do that by looking at the amperage or the current draw of our amplifier and making sure our batteries have the proper reserve capacity. It's not a bad idea to have a separate starting battery on a battery cutoff switch. So if you want to sit and jam for 3 hours straight, you want to reach back there and flip a switch and have a starting battery in reserve to crank your boat up so you're not left with a low or dead battery. The other thing is adequate wire. One thing with marine application, especially in saltwater, you want to make sure you use a copper wire that has been tinned, a good quality marine wire, to give you years and years of oxidation-free performance. The big thing on a boat is you don't have a good ground on most boats, so you want to use good gauge sizes that match your amplifier. A lot of amps would require 4-gauge power cable. If you have a longer run, maybe more. But the other big key when we're talking about powering amplifiers in a boat is, does your boat have an inboard like a wakeboard boat? Do you have an outboard like a center console? Or do you have an inboard outboard? These are critical features because with an inboard motor, you have a traditional alternator like you would on your car. My boat is actually an inboard and has a 200 amp alternator. So I have 4 batteries in my boat to power multiple amplifiers. But what that gives you is when you do crank the boat up and ride, you've got a lot of juice recharging those batteries. Certain outboard motors have what's called a stator. They don't have a true alternator. So they may only put out like 40 amps of charge. So if you decide to run 1, 2, 3 amplifiers, you need to make sure you have enough battery reserve to give you the playing time that you want. The other big key here is I would suggest soldering and heat shrinking your connections. You get a lot of vibration on a boat when you're hitting waves. It's much harsher on your connections than it is in an automobile where you have a suspension. I know some of you guys got some bad potholes out there and you would beg to differ, but I promise some of those harsh waves you hit give you a real strong hit. And you want to make sure that all our connections are good. And that's part of that install phase. And sometimes you look at this install and say, hey, this is over my head. Check out one of your authorized JBL dealers. These guys are absolute pros at doing the best install to make sure everything is done proper, from the wiring, the connectivity, the cutting and placement of speakers to give you the best sound quality, as well as making sure you have the adequate battery and charging setup to give you hours and hours of play out on the water. And for step 5, we've got testing and tuning, my favorite part. This is where you get to crank it up and see what that thing will do. Some important steps you want to make first here is verify all your connections. Make sure power is power, ground is ground, our remote turn-on's connected. Make sure that each zone is going to the proper channel on the amplifier, as well as making sure all the connections are secure at the battery, at the fuse block, as well as at your amplifier and at your head unit. Once verified, turn the volume up low, make sure everything is playing. Then we want to set our crossovers, whether it's high pass or low pass, depending on if we're running subwoofers or mid-range, 2-ways, tower speakers. We want to adjust these for different areas in the boat. Part of setting the crossovers is looking at the manufacturer's specs for the speaker and the frequency, and all that's available on JBL.com, as well as a QR code you can scan in your owner's manual. Now, once your crossovers are set, it's important to make sure your gains are set properly. If you're using a head unit that's 2-volt RMS, 4-volt RMS, or if you're using one of our amplifiers and you're feeding high level straight from the speaker leads into the amp, make sure all these switches are at the proper setting and your gain is set so that we don't have any distortion or clipping. Now, part of a professional installation is these guys are masters at properly tuning and setting amplifiers. They don't just do it by ear. They use tools. They use an oscilloscope to set your gains. They make sure we don't have any squared off signals. But again, check with your local authorized JBL dealer, or if you need help and assistance, check us out at JBL.com or in your owner's manuals. Now, once that part happens, we also want to keep an eye on battery voltage. These amplifiers can operate from 10 to 16 volts on our club amplifiers, but we want to make sure that we don't run our amplifiers too low. But in the instance you get out on the water and you play this thing 3 or 4 hours on 1 or 2 batteries and they get low, all our amplifiers from the club line have thermal as well as low voltage protection. So you can be assured is even if you run your batteries low, your amplifiers will shut down and go into protection until you recharge the batteries or switch to some of your other batteries. So if you got any other questions, again, feel free to reach out to any of your authorized JBL dealers or check us out at JBL.com.